everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV. My name is Cameron Weber. Thank you for watching our program. Today, we're going to talk about what has become known as the remilitarization of the world. Most importantly, we will discuss what is and what should not be the role of the United States in this new world military order. Join me to discuss the Cost of War project, or the new military order, is John Clifton. John, welcome back to Heartfire.
Peace and freedom and grace be with you and everybody else listening.
You're right. Yeah, thank you to our viewers. We've been talking about the remilitarization of the world since March 2020 with the Ukraine invasion. But we've been talking really about the militarization of society for much longer than that. So John, you've been on Hardfire recently talking about the Ukraine invasion, about the role of NATO in all of that, versus how it was portrayed in the mainstream media. We discussed the futility of sanctions, I believe is. And in February.
Well, I don't know if you want me to interrupt you during this.
Oh, yeah, please.
Oh, certainly. Well, I think the situation is more or less the same. Somebody in the U.S. and in the West has been really, really adamant about restarting up an active deployment campaign in terms of the military-industrial complex, not just having the big military and being able to do all the threats all the time and to maintain dominance around the world.
And
but now they want actual hot wars. You know?
Militarization during COVID was helpful for that too. Right?
Yeah. That was their trial run to see if they could get everybody in line for all these different campaigns. And it didn't work out for the most part. It worked for a time in 2020, 2021, and then it started to peter out, especially when the mandates started piling up. You got to go here, you got to wear this, and you got to use this under-tested drug in order to be a regular citizen.
Well, I have to say I failed in towing the line on that whole thing. I was anyway. We won't go into the militarization and the COVID. I think a trial run, very much so. Would be right. I mean, we're all ready for the next one. And things become, in terms of the remilitarization of the world. There's a lot of that has to do with, I think, the UN. It's like elitism, right? Yeah. Instead of democracy by the people, it's kind of democracy by the elite. And who's more elite than the UN?
Yeah,
they're not even elected.
Right. It's just important to note that these different alphabet soup organizations worldwide, whether it's NATO or WHO or whatever the entity, they seem to have this common grammar, we have issued an edict and everybody has to comply, fall in line, follow the rules-based order that we have set up.
Rules-based
order. That is,
rules-based order, exactly. It's instead of spontaneous order, it's rule-based order. It's kind of depressing for an individualist.
And whose rules? That's the issue that doesn't get discussed by the media, which is part and parcel to the delivery of this message about here's the policy and here's what you got to follow.
Local and decentralized mutual aid and cooperation seems to be crowded out of the big picture. So anyway, in February 2023, we talked about the possibility of Ukraine turning into another Vietnam, right? Where we slowly but surely send troops to the area. Eventually, we leave like we left in Afghanistan.
Well, what happened also is that in especially 2023 to now, there's been a petering out of enthusiasm. I mean, including by the people who were originally all for going into Ukraine and being proxy supporters of the war and proxy opponents of whatever Russia was doing there. And they just started seeing Zelensky more and more somebody who was an opportunist who was trying to keep his particular bed buttered by constantly pestering us with more requests for aid more emotional blackmail about, you have to help me and you have to help us. And nobody ever countering it with, Zelensky, why don't you just negotiate something with the Russians and get them to settle and keep the territories they have taken over, which they did not want to relinquish, and then let's see if they withdraw from any other hostilities and negotiate a peace like we do in the end of every other war.
A diplomatic solution,
Mm-hmm.
but
But understand he's partially self-dealing for himself, and he's partially always under the gun of NATO and the United States in terms of what he's supposed to be doing.
yeah. That's our main point of this program. What
Mhm.
is the United States' role, and why is the current president of Ukraine coming to the U.S. Congress asking for taxpayer money for weapons or more? Why? And why is that such an accepted thing? I mean, I don't like my taxpayer money being used for weapons, which are killing people overseas. I mean, we're funding both sides of Israel.
Well, that's another whole nother can of worms. So that's the
We'll get to
version of what you're seeing in embryo with Ukraine. Apparently, some people in the West, who are part of the complex that I've mentioned before, seem to want Ukraine as a kind of second Israel, and want it to be the next country that can wag the dog. The U.S. and the West being the dog to back it up in whatever it wants to do in its region of the world, and where there's a one-sided emphasis on their rights and their security concerns to the exclusion of everybody else's.
and to the militarization of solutions instead of diplomatic negotiations.
Yeah, and the core of the conflict there was Russia was also stating they had security concerns. They did not want an expansion of NATO. They thought they had an agreement at least verbally, from the West not to further encroach upon their sphere of influence in Asia and then in Eastern Europe by adding more countries to the list of NATO protected countries. And yet,
NATO was formed with the Soviet Union, to counter the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union fell militarily, many people were saying NATO should have been disbanded. I mean, I remember that exactly in 1989. People saying, okay, now let's demilitarize, but instead we haven't. NATO's just gotten larger.
And should have shrunk in its size and influence, and shrunk in its Article 5 emphasis on being there to muster some kind of military response or opposition to any activity by Russia. But instead, it seems to have been trying to expand and beef up Article 5 so that it's even more interventionist, regardless of the details of whatever conflict that's emerging. So Russia can be performing aggression and they'll be against it, or they can be trying to protect its own turf from threats to its border, as it claims in the case of Ukraine, and it will still say it's in fact practicing aggression, and on and around we go, and it gets more and more clear as the months go on. In the last year that that's what it is. It's a matter of Western dominance that wants to stay dominant and wants its rules to still be the foundation of all, not just interrelations between countries, but the way in which the whole world is supposed to project its understanding of itself and its neighbors. So we're supposed to be, U.S. presence is supposed to be more important in the South China Seas than China. U.S. Ideas about what should happen in Eastern Europe and in places like Ukraine should be more relevant than what people in Eastern Europe think about it.
Well, people don't know it's not just the American troops that are overseas signaling the U.S. is in charge militarily. But it's also the Navy. I mean, our Navy is there.
Mhm.
It's not just the troops, it's the Navy. And the Navy has been beefing up more and more, as you were saying.
Mhm.
So let's start with basic principles.
Right.
Last declared world war, or last declared war, any war was World War II. Yet we have been in continuous undeclared war since then through congressional authorizations of force. The most famous one is the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1964, which allowed the president to send in more troops to protect U.S. troops already there. This then allowed the slippery slope to our current war on terror, which creates protection for petrodollar interests. So my question is, it again goes back to the foundations of America. I mean, is it just a myth? I mean, the U.S. Constitution says that Congress has to declare a war before the administration can conduct force overseas, yet we've been in continually conducting force overseas without a declaration of war since the Korean War. So, is it a myth that we live under this constitution that says this is the way things have to be? Yet for 50 years, that has not.
Well, the principle of
Declaration.
we're in a state of war, which is what the whole idea of issuing a state of war exists in Congress, is part and parcel to what was traditionally just war principles, and it guaranteed in its construction that there's no question about who was the aggressor and who is the party attacked. So that one party attacks the other party, and that party then declares we're in a state of war because they're under it, and then they're therefore not the aggressors. But the one thing that the world powers, U.S. and NATO, in recent decades have wanted is to get away from that, because they don't want questions to happen about who started a war. They just want to dictate that they are the party that has the unilateral right to intervene with other countries, regardless
so
of.
you're saying that it's not Congress that has given up power to the president, but both.
Very true.
On the
And Congress would debate
and the
this.
congressional side are in it together. Okay.
But they have abandoned that largely because those advocates and lobbyists and funders of these candidates and politicians from the military industrial complex have largely bought off a lot of these congressmen, whether they are lobbyists from for the state of Israel, lobbyists for countries in that we are currently favorable to, and so on. They don't want debate happening at the congressional level, and so more of it has been de facto put into the executive, which is where the founder definitely did not want the power to be concentrated.
Right.
Exactly. And we're now in this state
that may or may not be a myth. Yeah. What I understand from the papers, Madison and Hamilton, the Federalist Papers, that in fact Hamilton really wanted a large and powerful military like England. He wanted the U.S. to be a naval power, a world power like England.
He was already thinking about moving
the stuff he wrote in Republican papers.
From England to U.S., he was already thinking about switching over that kind of war power and dominance to the U.S.
So I get my thing is the Constitution. For number one, it's not being followed, and so is America a myth? I know people that immigrate here and say, get disgusted at looking at the elections and get disgusted at looking at the war powers and indefinite detention and things like that. And so, is this really the United States?
Well, I remember there was a famous congressional discussion in which Henry Hyde said that, well, declaring a war is really by congressional act is really and anachronism, words to that effect, that it's old fashioned. We do it this way. Uh, and of course they never follow that up with statements like, "Here's the constitutional process by which we evolved
Yeah,
as per the Constitution
yeah.
how to declare war." He simply just said we passed that, and that
Yeah,
passive
let's
way
go back to that, yeah,
ignoring the Constitution. Yeah,
exactly, just ignoring the concept, exactly, and you can see that all over. The basic protection clause is ignored, left and right, right.
right. And
Speaking, I mentioned the Gulf of Tonkin earlier, right? And that seemed to me, I studied the history of this a little bit, the resolutions. And that seemed to be the big one, that then allowed the slippery slope to allow the presidential uses of force overseas with congressional.
one other aspect about the saying is that they wanted us to be in a kind of hair trigger position. They want a microwave situation where a threat happens and U.S. must respond immediately, and we have no choice but to
It's not a
respond.
microwave now, now it's a drone, now we just do it depersonalized from
Mhm.
the office towers around DC. But let me ask you, John, I know that you follow or are interested in conspiracy theories, but
Mhm.
it's been proven that the Gulf of Tonkin, that we actually blew up our own ship, or was it? It's been, they were saying that it wasn't necessarily, we weren't necessarily attacked, but it might have been blown up internally because of engine trouble. But then in the end, it's
Mhm.
found that in fact we did blow up our own battleship in Tonkin.
Well, like Lionel, the attorney, he has stated he's not a conspiracy theorist; he's a conspiracy analyst. Because
Exactly.
a lot of things happen are flat out conspiracies.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
question, how do you evaluate it to figure out how it happened, why it happened, and who was involved?
Well, we blew up our own ship in the Spanish
Yeah,
to start the Spanish-American War.
and the USS Liberty also attacked.
And the unknown one, the Mexican American.
Aware of.
We blew up our own ship. We attacked Mexico and then declared,
Yes,
right, war, something.
it's not just an exceptional situation or once in a while conspiracy theory. It's a playbook. It's a way in which the forces who want continuous war and enlargement of a power through the war power
Yeah.
can get what they want by simply stoking fears in the mass public by creating an incident that gets everybody on edge.
Yeah,
And
well, it sells newspapers.
justify that
The,
expansion.
the Spanish American blowing up your own ship, I mean, that was directly sponsored by, I won't mention the family publishing company, but one of the publishers, they know that war sells newspapers. But, it's pretty screwed up when
Yeah.
we're, that it seemed to be sending troops overseas as an honorable thing. It should be done, when in fact it should only be used to protect American citizens. Uh, let's discuss the Cost of War project, which tracks the human and monetary costs of U.S. counterterrorism activities. Here's a good graphic from them I'll put up. We have intervened in 78 countries without, as mentioned, without a declaration of war. So you can see that most of these places where the U.S. has troops or are training troops or providing.
As I said before, this is like a playbook. We are in dozens of countries because we are able to speedily get into these situations and are set up to stay there once we install. Which is why you almost never hear of any bases being abandoned and us withdrawing from anywhere. Afghanistan,
Yeah,
the most
it's the textbook definition of a bureaucracy. It's a textbook definition of a bureaucracy or a consultant. The idea is to get in the door and then stay there and get more power.
Yeah, and that's the other reason one more reason why there's no declaration of war, because what happens when Congress makes that declaration, in the discussion that follows, there's always the discussion, what is the end point, what is the exit plan, what are the conditions on which the war ends and aggression ends and therefore intervention ends. And they if you have that in place, then you have to conform to that in the following activity. But because we don't have a declared war, Congress doesn't get to set any such
Right.
structures, and so we have an endless intervention, endless war, open-ended
Exactly.
adventurism that almost never ends. We get 20 years of Afghanistan, even though you could argue that what we wanted to do there was solved in the first 6 months of the conflict.
Right, right. So then again, back to the cost of war, this intervention is violation of local sovereignty and people's right to self-determination.
Yes.
Yeah, it creates militarized special interest groups fighting each other in countries with aggressive foreign interests.
Mhm.
You know, Mali used to be very peaceful, and then our counterterrorism tactics, then they became militarized. Right? Most importantly, U.S. interventionism overseas creates animosity and blowback domestically. You know, you go places, tell them what to do with their land, tell them who to fight and why. Eventually, that's going to come back home.
There's an analyst named Steve Turley, not the Hurley who talks about legal issues all the time, but another gentleman who mentions that there's even been a pattern in reaction to all of this, especially you've seen like in places like Africa and in countries in the north west portion of Africa. That's called re-territorialization, where they are rejecting the concept that they have to be constantly part of a world system under the rules-based order set by other global organizations, and they're going to be just a regional group based on their own civilizational priorities, and want the colonizers, if you want to call them, or
neo-colonizers, because they do it under some kind of world organization that approves the intervention. So it's not just a nation state colonization, but a larger public purpose colonization. A couple minutes left. I want to talk about, so we talked about blowback. And May 2024 issue of Reason magazine highlights the fact that the U.S. is quickly depleting our strategic defensive stockpiling of missiles and bullets, right? So we're being very generous. We're selling our weapons and running out of our own stuff. Why? Because we just
go ahead.
Military defense contractors that get all the contracts, so we can't protect ourselves. And
we're spending a lot of money, on military in general, but we are running out of our standing supply of the, I would say, older generation weapons and ammunition. They had to be sent overseas to places like Ukraine, so we could get rid of them and say that we were using them positively for some purpose.
For technological
but they're not replacing them fast enough to perhaps help our own borders in our own country. But at least they're clearing them out so that the contractors can now run in and say, "Wow, you need some new weapons, you need some shiny new equipment," and whether or not it's been properly tested so that it could be.
John, I think it. We should wrap up. I think it just. I think it goes back to this Cold War mentality of game theory, where everything becomes a game and us versus them, and you model it, and it becomes like a toy. And generations of people brought up like that, including with NATO, and it becomes a game, and militarization loses all human perspective.
I think that's the case too. We just have so much. There's lack of foresight now in terms of what's the ultimate amount of defense we need to be in defense of our country versus trying to be an empire leader and run a world empire.
Well, like you said, with no declarations of war, and so everything is open ended.
Yeah, we've got to close off those open ended and shut down those most or all of those 78 theaters where we're doing things, most of which the public has no knowledge of because they're not being talked about. It's not being debated in Congress. It just keeps going on and on.
And it's not on National Pentagon Radio. I mean, National Public Radio.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know. Anyway, thank you, John Clifton, for talking with us again on about international relations and militarism. Thank you to our viewers for watching Hardfire again. We have each of our episodes appears on Brooklyn Free Speech Network, both on cable and throughout NYC. All boroughs in New York City get it on cable, and then streaming through the Brick Arts Media House, of course, worldwide. We have more than 50 programs about classical liberal ideas on our YouTube channel. Just search for Hardfire and Brooklyn Free Speech. Thank you again.
What do you think that I'm talking about? Racist shit, no, I'm calling you out. Selling this crap.